Hello class, and welcome to today's pre-algebra lesson, which is about powers and exponents. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to use integer exponents to show repetitive multiplication of rational numbers. So we're going to start with some vocab. The first term we have is power. This is a number being expressed using exponents. So this whole example down here, all together, the 7 and the 6 combined, is a power. The base is the number that is being multiplied. That's going to be the larger number as you are looking at a power. The exponent tells you how many times the number is being multiplied, and that is going to be the value in the superscript, so in that tiny elevated number in the problem. So essentially what it is saying is you have the number 7 being multiplied 6 times. So it's 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. So it tells you that you have the number 7 and you are multiplying it 6 separate times. So sometimes we want to take things that are written out with long multiplication and write them into their power format. So for example, this one has -8 times -8 times -8 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. Instead of having to write that all out, I can write -8 to the third power. Notice I kept that in parentheses still. And then multiplying by 1/2 to the fourth power, because there are 4 1/2s being multiplied. Go ahead and try this bottom example on your own. So we have 2/3 to the second power times 4 to the sixth power, because there are 2 2/3 pieces and 6 number 4s that are being multiplied. We can also write this same thing out when we have variables. So for this first example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 x's, so I would write that out as x to the 5th power. On the second example here, I have x minus y in parentheses 3 times. So I keep my values together in the parentheses and I say x minus y, and I have that whole thing 3 times. I don't separate out the values that are in the parentheses. I keep those variables together. Go ahead and try this bottom one on your own. So we have 9, and then we have m to the third and n to the second, because there are 3 m's and 2 n's. One thing I would like to make sure that you are aware of is the difference between negative bases and negative powers. So when the value is in parentheses with a negative and then the power, it is saying that you have -3 times -3 times -3 times -3. When you would put that into your calculator, you end up with a value of 81, positive 81. So if it's in parentheses, it means that that negative is getting multiplied every time. If the negative is in the front without parentheses, it means that you are doing negative times 3 to the 4th power. So 4 positive 3's being multiplied, which then gives you a final answer of -81. So if the value of your base is in parentheses with the negative, you include the negative as you multiply. If the value of your base does not have parentheses around the negative, that means you add the negative at the very end after you multiply the positive bases. We can also solve problems where we have powers involved. If you recall back to solving numeric expressions, we use the phrase PEMDAS, and that stands for parentheses and then exponents. So these powers fall under that exponent category. So there's nothing to solve inside either of these parentheses. So then I need to solve the exponent pieces. So this first part says -2 times -2 times -2, which is going to give you a -8. On the second one, we then have 3.5 times 3.5, which is going to give me 12.25. So I solved my exponents. There's no multiplication, there's no division. So I move on to my addition, which is -8 plus 12.5, which is going to give me a final answer of 4.25. Go ahead and try this one on your own. So we solve 8 to the 4th, which is 4,096. We solve -3 to the 3rd power, which gives you -27. And when you add those, you get a final answer of 4,069. You can also evaluate if there are variables and they tell you what the variable stands for. So our first step here would be to plug in the information that we know. So instead of saying a squared, I'm going to take the value for a and I'm going to say 3 squared plus, and then I'm going to take the value for b, which is 1/2 squared. Now, when you have a fraction, both pieces of your fraction are going to get squared. So this first part is just 3 squared, which is 9. The second part is going to be 1/2 times 1/2, or you can say 1 to the 2nd power, which is 1, over 2 to the 2nd power, which is 4. So we multiplied both values, we applied the exponent to both the numerator and the denominator. When I add those together now, I end up with 9 and 1/4 as my final answer. Go ahead and try this one on your own. So plug in your values, simplify with those exponents, and then add at the end, we end up with 14 and 8 over 125. Last example here with a word problem. The table shows the average weights of 2 endangered species. How much more does the brown bear weigh than the panther? So since we know the brown bear is going to weigh more, we're going to solve that piece first. So for the brown bear, I've got 2, which is just by itself, times 5 to the 2nd power, which is 25, times 7. So I solved my exponent piece because that comes first in PEMDAS. Then I would go ahead and multiply 2 times 25 times 7, which is going to give me a grand total of 305 pounds for the brown bear. Then I'm going to move on to the panther. When I simplify that, 2 to the 3rd power is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8, times 3 times 5. Now moving on to that multiplication step, you would do 8 times 3 times 5, which is going to give you an answer of 120 pounds. So now that we have our 2 separate values, we want to find out how much more the brown bear weighs. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract those to find the difference. And when I do that, I would get an answer of I would get an answer of 230 more pounds. So I would write that out as the brown bear is 230 pounds heavier, or weighs 230 pounds more. Any distinction along that line, heavier than the panther. If you have questions about this or anything else from the lesson, please feel free to reach out and let me know.